Am I the a-hole for booking to go away the same weekend as my boyfriend, leaving him to look after our daughter? My boyfriend and I have a 3-year-old daughter together. Before we had her, he would go away occasionally on his own. It wasn't frequent, just the odd trip here and there, and it never really caused any issues. Since our daughter was born, though, those trips have become more regular. They're still short, usually just a night or two, but they happen often enough now that it feels like a pattern rather than an exception. He also travels to see his other daughter from a previous relationship. I want to make it clear that I have never had a problem with that. I understand how important it is for him to maintain that relationship, and I've always supported it. The only reason I bring it up is because it ties into the scheduling problems we've had. The main issue is that he is very bad at communicating when he's going away. It's not that he hides it exactly, but he doesn't properly tell me in a way that allows us to plan around it. When it causes a conflict, he always says the same thing, that he already told me and that I must have forgotten. First, I questioned myself. I wondered if I really was forgetting things or not paying attention properly. But over time, it became clear that this wasn't just occasional miscommunication. It kept happening, and it was always in situations where plans had already been made. There have been several instances where this caused real problems. One time, I had arranged for my mum to babysit so we could go out together for our anniversary. It wasn't something we do often, so I had put a bit of thought into it. I had coordinated with my mum in advance, made sure she was available, and planned everything so we could have a proper evening together. Not long before that, he told me he had arranged to go and see his daughter that same weekend. He said he thought he had already told me about it. I knew he hadn't, at least not in any clear or definite way, because I wouldn't have planned something like that otherwise. I didn't ask him to cancel. It didn't feel fair to involve his daughter in that kind of conflict. Instead, I canceled the plans I had made and told my mum not to come. It was disappointing, but I told myself it was just one of those things. Another time, I had been invited to a baby shower. It was important to me to go, and I had already said yes. I had assumed he would be home with our daughter, as we hadn't discussed anything that would suggest otherwise. Again, it turned out he had made plans to travel to see his other daughter. Again, he said he thought he had told me. And again, I had to rearrange things. In that case, I ended up not going because I couldn't find anyone else to look after our daughter at short notice. There was also a time when I had arranged to go to the theater with a friend. It was something we had been planning for a while, and tickets had already been booked. When the date got closer, the same situation came up. He had scheduled a trip, said he had mentioned it before and couldn't change it because of the distance involved. Each time I adjusted my plans. I didn't want to create issues around his visits with his daughter, and I didn't want to turn it into a bigger argument than it needed to be. But it meant that my own plans were consistently the ones that got pushed aside. After a while, I tried to address the root of the problem rather than just dealing with each situation as it came up. I suggested that we start using a shared calendar. Something simple, just so we could both see what was coming up and avoid double booking. I bought a family calendar and put it somewhere visible. The idea was that whenever either of us made plans, we would write them down. That way there would be a clear record and there wouldn't be any confusion about who had told who what. In practice, it didn't work very well. I would write my plans in it, but he rarely did unless I reminded him multiple times. If I asked him to add something, he would sometimes say he would do it later, and then it wouldn't happen. If I brought it up again, he would say I was treating him like a child. So the system that was meant to solve the problem didn't really change anything. It just added another layer where I felt like I was responsible for keeping track of everything. Then restrictions came in, and for a while things slowed down. He wasn't going away as much because he couldn't. During that time, I thought things might balance out naturally, but it didn't really happen that way. As soon as restrictions eased, he started going away again. Short trips like before, but frequent enough that it felt like he had quickly returned to his usual pattern. During that same period, I hadn't had a single night away from our daughter. It's not that I didn't want to. I had actually made plans a couple of times to go and see a friend or just have a break, but each time something came up, usually related to restrictions, and the plans had to be cancelled. He has said to me more than once that he encourages me to go away and that he's not stopping me. On the surface, that sounds fair. But in reality, it doesn't feel that simple. When he goes away as often as he does, it limits the opportunities for me to do the same. Someone has to be home with our daughter, and it's usually me. It's not just about whether he says I can go. It's about whether there's actually space for me to make those plans without them conflicting with his. There's also the issue of childcare. I'm not comfortable asking my parents to look after our daughter for extended periods at the moment, especially given everything that's been going on. So it's not as simple as just arranging for someone else to step in. All of this built up over time, but it wasn't one big argument. It was more like a series of smaller situations that never really got resolved. Then recently I finally made plans again. Restrictions were easing and it felt like a realistic opportunity this time. I arranged to go and see a friend for a couple of days in the summer. It wasn't anything complicated, just a chance to get away for a short while. I told him about it as soon as I had the dates confirmed. I didn't want there to be any confusion, so I made sure to be clear about when I would be away. That's when he told me I couldn't go on those dates because he had already planned a cycle holiday. I hadn't heard anything about it before that moment. There had been no conversation about it, no mention of dates, nothing written in the calendar. When I said that, he responded the same way he always does. He said he had told me already and that I must have forgotten. At that point, it felt less like a misunderstanding and more like a pattern repeating itself. He asked me to cancel my trip. He said I could see my friend at any time and that his plans were already set. I considered whether I could rearrange it. Technically, I probably could. My friend is flexible and it wouldn't be impossible to find another time. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was falling into the same situation again. Every time there's a conflict, my plans are the ones that change. His plans stay as they are and I adjust around them. This was the first time I had arranged something that actually went through without being cancelled beforehand. It felt important to me not just because of the trip itself but because of what it represented. I told him I didn't think I should have to cancel. I said that if anything needed to be rearranged, it could be his trip as well. Camping or cycling can be moved just as easily as visiting a friend. He didn't take that well. Since then he's been in a bad mood about it. He hasn't said much directly, but it's clear he's not happy with the situation. There's a tension there that wasn't there before, or at least not as openly. I keep going back over it in my head, trying to figure out if I'm being unreasonable. On one hand, I know that I could rearrange my plans and avoid the conflict entirely. On the other hand, it feels like doing that would just reinforce the same pattern that's been happening for a long time. I'm not trying to stop him from seeing his daughter or from having his own time away. I just want the same consideration when it comes to my plans. The calendar idea hasn't worked because he doesn't use it consistently. Conversations about plans don't seem to stick in the same way for him as they do for me. And when there's a clash, the responsibility to fix it ends up on me. So now I'm in a position where I've made plans, he's made plans, and neither of us wants to change them. He thinks I should rearrange because he believes he told me first. I don't think I should because I genuinely wasn't told, and even if I had been, it wasn't communicated in a way that allowed me to plan around it. I could rearrange it but feel I shouldn't have to. He could also rearrange camping. So I have been refusing. He is now in a sulk. Am I the asshole for not rearranging my plans? Edit. I had got a family calendar when the issues of him double booking seeing his daughter arose. Problem is he will only write in it if I nag him to do so. Or he will say he will do it later and not to treat him like a child. Update. Not sure if anyone really wanted an update, but things escalated in a way I didn't expect and I needed to get it out somewhere. I read through a lot of the responses on my original post and took on board what people were saying about communication, boundaries, and the calendar situation. A lot of people pointed out that if we were going to avoid this happening again, there needed to be one clear system that both of us actually used. So I spoke to him again properly this time about the family calendar. I didn't approach it like an argument. I explained that the whole issue wasn't just about this one trip. It was about a pattern that had been happening for a long time. Plans clashing, me being the one to rearrange things, and the constant confusion over who said what and when. I told him that from now on, if something wasn't written on the calendar, it didn't exist. That was the only way I could see this working. I made sure my trip was written clearly on it, dates and all, in a way that couldn't be missed. I also asked him directly about his cycle trip, because at that point it still wasn't written down. He seemed to agree with all of it. There wasn't any pushback like before about being treated like a child. He said he understood why I was frustrated and that the system made sense. He even said he would reschedule his cycle trip so that it didn't clash with mine. At that point I felt relieved more than anything. It felt like we had finally reached a point where we were on the same page. There wasn't any tension in that conversation and it didn't feel forced. It felt like a practical solution that we both accepted. After that, things went back to normal for a bit. There weren't any obvious signs that anything was wrong. He didn't bring up the trip again and neither did I because I thought it had been sorted. Then it got to the morning I was meant to leave. He usually wakes up earlier than I do, so hearing him get up didn't stand out. It's normal for him to be up and moving around while I stay in bed a bit longer. I remember hearing the door at some point, but I didn't think anything of it. It sounded like the kind of thing that happens every day, like taking the bins out or stepping outside briefly. When I got up properly, something felt off straight away. The house was quieter than usual. I called out for him but there was no response. At first I assumed he had just stepped out and would be back shortly, but as I moved through the house, it became clear that wasn't the case. The car wasn't there. A few of his things were missing. Not everything, just enough to make it obvious that he hadn't just gone for a quick errand. I tried calling him. He went straight to no answer. I tried again a few minutes later with the same result. At that point I started to feel a mix of confusion and frustration. There hadn't been any conversation about him going anywhere that morning. As far as I knew, he was meant to be home with our daughter while I left later for my trip. I went next door and asked my neighbor to check the garage where he keeps his bike. I didn't have access to it, so I needed someone else to confirm. The bike was gone. That's when it fully clicked what had happened. I went back inside and tried calling him again. Still nothing. By that point it wasn't just confusion anymore. It was anger, but in a quieter way. The kind where everything starts to feel very clear all at once. I called my friend, the one I was meant to be visiting, and explained what was going on. I told her I couldn't find him and that I was probably going to miss my train. It felt ridiculous even saying it out loud, like I was explaining something that shouldn't even be possible after the conversation we had. The timing made it worse. Everything had been planned around that day. Bags were packed, arrangements were made, and I had genuinely believed there wouldn't be any issues this time. Around midday he finally called. He told me he had gone on his trip. There wasn't any hesitation in the way he said it, no attempt to soften it or explain it beyond that. He told me to check the calendar. I went over to it immediately. Where my plans had been written there was a patch of Typex. Over it he had written in his cycle trip. It wasn't messy or unclear. It had been done deliberately, neatly, like he was correcting something rather than removing it. I said a few things to him that I'm not going to repeat here, but the conversation didn't go anywhere productive. He turned it back on me and said that I should have gotten up earlier if I wanted to leave first. That somehow this was a timing issue rather than a decision he had made. That was the point where something shifted for me. It wasn't just about the trip anymore or the calendar. It was about the fact that we had a clear agreement, and he chose to ignore it in a way that made it impossible for me to follow through with my own plans. I told him that he had won and that he was now free to go on as many cycle trips as he wanted. After that call I didn't try to reach him again. My friend suggested that instead of staying at home feeling angry I should come out with her and her child. She had already made plans to go to the seaside, and her son is around the same age as my daughter. It wasn't what I had originally planned, but it was something. We went the next day. It was actually a good day. The children played together and for a while things felt normal. It wasn't the trip I had planned, but it was still time away from the situation, which I think I needed at that point. Being out of the house helped me look at everything a bit more clearly. Not in a dramatic way, just in a practical sense. The pattern that had been there for years wasn't going to change. Even when we agreed on something straightforward, it still ended up the same way. When I got back I told him not to come back. He said I was overreacting. From his perspective, it was just another disagreement about plans, something that could be worked around. But it didn't feel like that to me anymore. It wasn't just about one incident. It was about how many times similar things had happened, and how each time it ended with me adjusting and him carrying on as usual. He came back later. I can't change the locks because we're renting, so there wasn't a way to physically stop him from coming in. When he walked in he acted like things were normal. Not in an aggressive way, just like nothing significant had happened. I asked him to leave calmly because our daughter was there and I didn't want it to turn into an argument in front of her. He refused. He said he wasn't going anywhere and that he would look after her the following week so I could go away then. That response made it clear that he still didn't understand the issue. It wasn't about swapping weekends or making up for lost time. It was about the way he handled the situation in the first place. I told him I couldn't believe he had missed the point entirely. After that, I called my brother and asked if he could come and pick us up. It wasn't something I had planned in advance, but it felt like the only option at that stage. We packed what we needed and left. Since then we've been staying at my brother's place while I figure out the next steps. There are practical things that need to be sorted out and none of it is quick or straightforward. He has been calling repeatedly and even showed up at my brother's house at one point. My brother spoke to him and turned him away. Eventually he did apologize. But by then it didn't change anything for me. It wasn't about whether he could say the right words after the fact. It was about everything that led up to that point. I told him I'm still done. Not out of anger in the moment, but because I don't have the energy or the willingness to keep dealing with the same situation over and over again.